My name's John Horner. I'm with the Missoula Downtown Association, Vice President of Advocacy. Thank you all for coming. We are in the Historic Places for Work, Historic Preservation in Main Street. Today we have Philip Maechling back here. He's with the Historic Preservation Officer for here in Missoula. Jim McDonald, he's the owner of A&E Architects. Randy Hafer, next to him, is the president of High Plains Architects. And Kate Hampton is on the schedule, but she's not feeling well. For Chere Justo is stepping in for her. I'm not sure of Chere's role. I think you were Kate's boss, is that right? way to step in. I like that. Yeah, that's perfect. Philip's going to start us off. We're going to try and move through. I know we started a little bit late. One quick reminder immediately after this, we'll meet upstairs, and there's shuttles that are taking people to lunch. So we'll meet upstairs in the lobby area to catch those. So we'll start off with Philip first. And once again, thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for coming. I'm going to go very quickly through a couple of alternatives, and then Jim McDonald will take the table, and then Randy, and then Chere. So quickly, historic preservation and Main Street are ultimately tied together. And one of the places where that is so evident is in Virginia City. The Montana Heritage Commission and the Department of Commerce manage Virginia City. This is Virginia City in its heyday in 1866 with a couple of thousand people living there. And then this is what it looked like in the 1940s, around 1940. This is what it looks like today. And so looking at Main Street and all of the challenges of Main Street, we have to have cooperation from local government. Virginia City happens to be the county seat for Madison County, and this is the county courthouse. Again, the 1940 version and today. Some of it might look pretty shabby, but a lot of rehabilitation work has gone into downtown Virginia City. This is the first brewery. The Gilbert Brewery in Virginia City, and the Preservation Alliance, Chere's organization, has really helped to do stabilization and rehabilitation, and the Department of Commerce has funded a lot of rehabilitation work in the Gilbert Brewery. And so we see this rather humble original beginning of Montana being restored piece by piece by piece with a lot of sweat and a lot of work. This is a public-private partnership between the state of Montana, which owns Virginia City, or part of Virginia City, and all of the other private ownerships which are intermixed together. And so this is one option. And 150 people now live in Virginia City year-round. And in the summer, I think they get 30 to 40,000 people. I'm not sure what the exact number is. And again, adapted to modern uses and modern commerce. Missoula has its own challenges. There are a number of them. This is Missoula in 1894 with the Chicago Beehive. Pretty interesting signage, those of you who are into sign regulations. And again, Missoula at the turn of the century, and now this is really Missoula with a bicyclist and a car. And the Missoula Mercantile Building, one of the, of course, anchors of downtown. Missoula was a fairly self-sufficient place, not quite so self-sufficient now. A lot of the signage is gone. This is in the 1920s. This is a residential district right here in the downtown. It is one of Missoula's historic districts, the East Pine Street district. The most density of any neighborhood in Missoula is in this historic district. These are Missoula's historic districts. The downtown, of course, surrounded by districts both to the north and to the south. And then Fort Missoula is our other historic district, which gives us some interesting opportunities and, again, some interesting challenges. Again, Missoula then, in Missoula now. Most of the fabric of historic Missoula is what Missoula has now. We were lucky. The wrecking ball didn't tear the downtown apart. We have new construction, and of course, we've lost some things. Same site. And I think, Jim, you're going to be talking a little bit about this building. This is the Higgins Bank building from 1889. And so with that, Jim McDonald. And what I'd like to do is have the presentations take place and then questions, if that makes sense, because we are a little short on time. End show.
That was quick, sorry.
You know how to get rid of this one and go to the next one? While Jim is doing that, a couple of things that help in terms of public understanding. Books about your historic community. This is a Montana Main Streets book. The Historical Society and our office helped to publish it. And then this is Missoula Then and Now, which just came out this summer, which is a book of historic and contemporary images. This is a kind of program, this is a book that I actually did, but those are the kinds of things that can build a good understanding of your community through your own resources.
It's interesting, as part of preservation, I've been an architect here in Missoula since 1978, having my own firm working in historic preservation, but I grew up in eastern Montana in very small communities, Cascade, Sun River, where I grew up most of my younger years, and then in just east of Billings for a little while at Shepherd, that was where our ranch was, and I was only there for a couple of years before I went to MSU and got my architectural degree, and then came here right after that in 1970. But what I want to talk about today is that sense of place that was talked about in the earlier one, if you were in there, as far as zoning and regulation, but why it's important, and the importance of preservation of historic buildings to our downtowns, because really, from a sustainability standpoint, they are the greenest buildings. You're reusing them and adapting them for the new uses. Just a couple quotes, and I'll read these because they're really important to quote. This is from Clarence Beaumont, who's with Smart States Better Communities, and it says, "Communities should be shaped by choice, not chance. The historic preservationist advocates the retention of places that unify and give meaning to a community." And then as far as historic preservation, because historic buildings are unique, they convey the community's differentiation, diversity, identity, and individuality. And that differentiation, in economic terms, commands a monetary premium. And I'm going to talk about that as we go through this today. And then if we look at the word sustainability, which is a big word right now, it really goes back a lot earlier as far as historic preservation. So if you look at sustainability in its truest sense, addresses not only environmental concerns, but economic and social equity issues as well. So if you're developing a building, developing a green affordable building for housing, offices, retail, whatever it might be in historic structures, that provides the benefits in all those areas of environment, economic and social issues that are part of the community. Back in 1980, the National Trust came out with this poster that essentially says, "Reusing America's Energy." And what it was all about is that it took, at that time, a gallon of gasoline to make 4 bricks. So think about that in a building which has hundreds of thousands of bricks, of how many gallons of gasoline it took to create those bricks. So why not reuse them? And that was really the whole emphasis of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and we as preservationists in that time, is start reusing these buildings, not make museums out of them, readapt them, reuse them for other purposes, and save those structures. One of the first buildings in 1981 that I did here in Missoula was the Higgins Block, which Philip just mentioned earlier. The building was pretty much intact except for this whole level here had been completely modernized into a 1950s theme right after the war, and it had been totally changed. The rest of the building was pretty much intact. It was an easy project to go in, bring it up to code, put in the new systems, and then restore that first floor and tie it all back together so that it became a very important building on the downtown of Missoula. And this was, I should back up here, this was just after the mall had opened in 1978. The downtown, everybody moved to the mall, not everybody, there were several of us that stayed here, but a lot of the people moved out, and there was a lot of vacant storefronts. But the other thing about this building is that this building and the Montana building on the other end of the block were bought by some developers from Hawaii, and they wanted to tear down everything from here to the Montana building and make it Wendy's Drive-In. That was the first look, the first thing that they were looking at for this building, or this site. And fortunately, the little space here, which was my ex-father-in-law, Judge Dussault, he would not sell out to them, and so the whole plan was dropped. But then they came back in and said, well, why don't we use the tax credits at that time that were available, let's restore the building, and they did that, and that's why the building was saved. One of the things that we were able to do, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, is that unfortunately another building, Loyola Sacred Heart, was torn down at that same time over where the hospital is. And so we lost that real important building. But what we got from it was somebody saved the brick and the granite, and so we were able to put back in the granite pieces that were missing, carve them all out, get them put back in, and restore that storefront. The interior had pretty much been just covered up with sort of imitation wood. It's a photographic paneling that they used to do to make it look like different types of wood. It was just all covered up on the inside. We pulled that off and we found all the windows and details that were there, and we were able to restore that back. The hallways, everything was there, and so it was an easy job and an easy way to bring it back. And since that time in the downtown here, I think for this particular building, there's been a waiting list to get into this building, and not very many people have ever moved out. I had to move out because I moved into about the building actually next door and put our offices over there, but very few people have moved out in those, 30 years that it's been available. As far as the benefits of historic preservation, one of the things that, of course, we always look at in all our communities is that these buildings really identify what we're all about. It's our downtown, it's part of our history, and it's important to save and rely on those buildings in our small towns. Revitalizing of historic buildings attract new businesses. Tourism, which is going to be talked about later, is very important because people come for not only to look at the building or to just come to Missoula to play or whatever, but they go to the historic districts, they go to the downtowns. If you have these buildings saved and redone, it works well. And it's very important, that historic building and that historic stock, as far as maintaining our main streets and our downtown revitalization. If you look at the environmental benefits, again, the greenest building is one that's already built, but also, if you look at lifespans, that Higgins building is 111 years old now. It's been worked on once to really bring it up to code, but it's a building that's going to be here for a long time. And so it's very important, whereas new buildings tend to be, and they're getting better, and I think as we're doing more green buildings and sustainable buildings, we're going to see a longer life that we haven't seen before. But in tearing down buildings, about 40% or up to 40% of the material in a landfill is construction waste. And so it really starts filling up our landfills. Also, just another typical two-story commercial building in a downtown, if you tear that down, you're eliminating all the environmental benefits of recycling 1,344,000 aluminum cans. So just think about that as far as what you're doing in order to protect the environment. And then less energy and resources are required to rehabilitate. Not in all cases. There's been some buildings that have taken a lot of energy, but in most cases, there's less energy and resources needed in order to do this. If you look at rehab versus new construction, they can be roughly the same. If there's no demolition required, a major rehabilitation can be up to 12% less and 9% more than new construction. So there's a little bit of variation there. But you know, if you do that demolition and of existing buildings, it can also, or if you don't do that demolition, you can have some cost savings of even anywhere from 3 to 16% in developing an existing building again. The benefits of rehabilitation: old buildings need work, often can be acquired at lower prices. Not necessarily true now, it seemed to be more in the earlier years, but it is the case in especially some of the smaller towns. Rehabilitation is labor intensive. It requires less construction sometimes. You can phase it, so you can start on part of the building, get it operating, go back in and do some other work. So it's really important to try and rehabilitate, reuse existing buildings as much as you can. If you look at just the costs of it, a typical rehabilitation project, about 60 to 70% is labor intensive, and the rest is material compared to new construction, which is about equal as far as what you do. If you look at materials, we have, of course, lumber and those materials in Montana, but you don't have everything. You don't have steel, you don't have some of the brick or concrete block or whatever it might be in Montana. Those come to us as part of a project, but if you look at how that dollar that comes, it doesn't circulate here very much. It only circulates about one time by buying it here in the community. It circulates where it was made, of course, and does well. But as far as labor, if your dollars are spent on labor and rehabilitation is more labor intensive, this can go up to just about 6 times as far as that dollar circulating through the community, buying cars, buying groceries, whatever it might be, and you can keep jobs local in your community. Also with the rehab tax credits, when we did the Higgins building, it was a 25% historic tax credit, and then in 1986 they changed that. Now there's a 20% investment tax credit for rehabilitation of historic buildings, and then Montana has a 5% investment credit for Montana taxes. So in other words, between the two, it's still up around 25%. A building has to be listed on the National Register. You have to do it in a way that meets the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, and it has to be approved by the Park Service. Montana, the only regulation, if it's approved by the Park Service, Montana approves it for the Montana tax credit. As far as benefits for local taxation, when we see a lot of empty buildings, their uses are not generating income. There's taxes may still be high, but if you can get it back into a good use, you also are returning the building to the tax rolls. They sometimes command higher retail prices, or rental prices, excuse me, and sale prices because of their prestige value. Like I say, the Higgins building there, there were so many people trying to get that building just because of its prestigious corner there, as well as the architecture of that building, in order to save it. And the person that's had it since the original developers has had it just about, I think it's 25 years now. Retaining buildings saves the need to purchase high-cost urban land, and your tax dollars are saved through the reuse of buildings, and you also have in-place utilities, transportation, some of the things that are important that you don't have to build as you move out into the suburbs. I'm not going to go a lot into design review. We kind of talked about that a little bit this morning if some of you were in the zoning regulation, but it's very important. We just started the design review here in Missoula as of July 1st, and Bozeman has had it up to, I think it's 20 years now, maybe a little bit more. But it really helps to protect not only property values, but to protect the integrity and the importance of the downtown, making sure that that sense of place is still there, not only with the existing buildings, but with the new buildings you build to tie it all together. And just lastly here, I just want to show the Bluebird building. This was a building built in 1898. It started out as commercial on the first floor, rooms up above, And then in 1913, it was turned into the Bluebird Theater, well, Empress Theater, and then it became the Bluebird, and then the Fox Theater here in Missoula. And I bought this building in 1991, but we used the historic tax credits. We restored the building, the front of the building, back to the way it was in 1898. And because we still had the top part, the whole bottom part had to be redone. But what I want to show here is that you can do very contemporary interiors. The whole interior was lost, the theater is all gone, and all those sorts of things. But you can do a very contemporary design. You don't necessarily have to restore it. You can still get the tax credits and do something that brings it up to code and does an office building that you really like. There's two parts to this building. It's our entrance to our offices, and there's a bookstore next door. And we use this in a way to keep the retail on that first floor level, is that these large doors in the back of our conference room open up into the bookstore, which is the University of Montana Fact and Fiction bookstore. And they then open it up for all our readings and events that they have, and it really works very well. Plus, we were able to expose the trusses that held up the balcony of the theater that was in there, and shows some of the details and parts of the building that were part of that whole early construction. So preservation and green buildings, there's a real connection there between preservation. It's recycling the materials, a minimum impact on the environment, because of the reuse of those materials, not filling up the landfill with a lot of construction waste. Plus, you can use historically green materials in order to restore a building or bring it back. There are materials out there that you can use in order to do that. And then just even sustainable construction methods, just because you're able to save the building, reuse it, clean it up, whatever works very well. So in conclusion, I just want to say that preservation of historic buildings are the greenest buildings. They are sustainability. As far as what we're talking about Sustainability Day, they've always been here. They're important to the downtown, the sense of place, and it's really something that we all should be proud of. And I think Randy's going to talk about some real cases that they've actually taken in both the lead credits as well as preservation to go even beyond what I've been talking about here. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm Randy Hafer. I'm with High Plains Architects in Billings, and I'm going to show some projects. Thank you, Jim, by the way. That's perfect. That sets me up very well for what I want to talk about. I'm going to be talking about some projects that we've been involved with in Billings. I don't know if, how many of y'all are from smaller towns in Montana? Great, perfect. Because although I'm from Billings, and Billings is the big town here in the state, what we do, frankly, is very accessible to small communities. Every town in Montana has a main street. Almost every main street in Montana has cool old buildings, and they're almost, regardless of size of town, there are opportunities where buildings on Main Street are either underutilized or not utilized at all. And the lessons that we've learned are easily translatable to small communities. So I'm going to talk about that through some specific projects that I hope will make that point clear. A couple of things that I do want to point out. That's our staff, of course, because we thought we should have our picture on the screen. But some key points that I want to make about all these projects that we're going to talk about is that, first of all, they're all designed and constructed entirely by Montanans, by us. We're not having to bring in sophisticated consultants or experts or whoever's from other parts of the world to make these things happen. We're doing it locally. We're figuring out how to finance it locally. A number of these projects that I'm going to show you actually are projects that I developed, and I can tell you for sure that I am not a developer by training or by anything. I'm an architect. One of the things that they specifically avoid in architecture school is any training of any kind about business. We don't know anything about business. We don't know anything about finance, so I had to make all this stuff up on my own. But we can do it. So again, this is one of the accessibility things. If we can figure out how to do this kind of project with the sort of skill set that we have, it can be done just about anywhere. Of course, anytime we're redeveloping, as Jim was mentioning, buildings in downtown or on main streets, we've obviously got transportation efficiencies. That means people can walk. It makes the whole area much more vibrant. In the specific examples that I'm going to show, all of these were vacant buildings, anywhere from 3 to 25 years. Again, not an unusual circumstance, unfortunately, around the country, much less Montana, because we have that great American attitude, which is particularly pronounced, I think, in this part of the world, where if it's old, throw it out. If it's yesterday's, it's no good anymore. We've got to get rid of it. So that's completely contrary to our attitude, which is that if it's old, it's cool. So we want to figure out how to keep it and reuse it. And then of the 5 projects I'm going to show you, all of them took advantage of historic preservation tax credits, and 2 of them are LEED certified at the platinum level, which is the highest level. And again, as Jim was saying, these buildings are inherently green. There are just huge opportunities to take these derelict old buildings from where they are now to the state-of-the-art kinds of buildings for the 21st century, which we think is a real exciting opportunity. So with that, I'm going to jump into some examples. This first one is called the Sopo Lofts. Sopo, south of post office. Okay, so this is what it looked like when we started. This building had been vacant for at least 10 years prior to our acquiring it. You'll notice here, that's all boarded up. The windows had all been removed, mostly replaced with just single panes of glass. This was an overhead garage door. That was a clue to its most recent existence, which was as a drive-through pawn shop. Every community needs one. So I never did really understand what that was all about, but nevertheless, that's what it was about. So you could drive in right there, do your pawning business in the comfort of your own car, and then speed out the back door and escape without anybody knowing what happened to you. One interesting things about that situation is that the garage door in the back was about 2 feet higher than the street level in the front. So in order to not just ram into the wall, they had to create a ramp, which was constructed of recycled 22-foot long 3x12 bridge timbers stacked in kind of a tiered system, which I will show you later because those were all salvaged and recycled then in a later project. Anyway, so this building, what we did with it, one of the first things you got to do, it doesn't make any sense to try to resurrect a building if you don't have a use for it. And we're not in the museum business, so we're not trying to make all of these old buildings into museums. But one of the things that frankly it's really been our primary focus and passion is bringing housing to downtown. We have a lot of people that need to live places. So rather than trying to make all of this stuff be commercial uses again, we have retained the commercial use on the first floor, but the second floor was converted into 6 loft apartments. And then we decommissioned the drive-through pawn operation and made that an indoor parking garage for the residential tenants. So the upstairs, this is what it looked like when we first bought the building. Those were not original finishes, so we tore that sheetrock, which had obviously been hastily installed at some point in time, off. Found out why they'd put it up there, because there had been a fire in the building, and the whole ceiling was just inky black. It was like walking into a black hole. All light was sucked out of that space. So we had to paint it. It took about 8,000 coats of paint to cover that up, but the structure is exposed. And and you can't really see it in this photograph, but where some of the members, structural members, are charred, which creates kind of a texture on the surface of the wood. We charge extras for those apartments because we call that leatherette, and it's a special finish that you can't just get. Anyway, we took these very nondescript spaces and made it into something pretty nice, without really doing a lot, except subdividing the space, adding some plumbing and a little paint, and all of a sudden we've got these really great downtown loft apartment spaces. So that's the first one. Now, oh, and I did want to just mention too, it was on there, I don't know if you noticed, but this project was about a little over $500,000 in qualified rehabilitation expenses, which resulted in a tax credit of $131,000. So that's 25% return on investment just for doing the project and deciding that we could play by the rules. And what I wanted to say about that, and Jim did mention the program, it's not an easy program to get through, but they're just tremendous rewards, because with a building like this and all the other ones that I'm going to show you, you can choose to do whatever you want to it. There's no requirement that you have to play by this particular set of rules, but if you do, you get money back. What's not to like about that? So of course, those rules will have to do with things like restoring the facade, and in a case like this, as Jim was pointing out with the Bluebird building, that there were no interiors, so there really were very few restrictions. We were able to do what we wanted to do. We provided housing downtown, we restored the facade, we improved the streetscape, and we also got a reward for doing all of that. Andy?
Randy, how many units did you have upstairs?
6. Total 6. So that's another thing. Again, small towns. I mean, we're not talking huge projects here. These are little projects. These are small buildings.
Before and after tax value?
I should know that because, of course, we have to pay the increased tax value, but I let my wife pay those bills. I don't want to know. But I can tell you that we have obviously substantially increased the taxable value of that building. And I think the tax bill has gone from something around $1,000 a year to around $7,000 a year on property taxes. Okay, this building, again, is a pretty good example of opportunities that most people wouldn't see. It's a little hard maybe to tell. That doesn't look as horrible as this building really was. It was built in 1896. This was the anchor building of the Chinese block in Billings. So it was the only building left on this block. It was the only Chinese building left on this block. So it had a very interesting history. Again, it had been vacant for around 10 years when we acquired it. But its immediate previous life was as the Arcade Bar, which was without question the most notorious bar in Billings. I mean, this was just a badass place. And, this was the sort of place that college boys would go to on a dare, because the dare was, can you go in there and get out with your life? Quite literally. And we learned some interesting things. I mean, by the time we got to it, it had been vacant a long time. It was, but most of this boarding up actually had occurred before then. So it was dark, it was dingy. When we got in, the first time I went into the building was in February of some year, a number of years ago. This was the front entrance. At street level, you can see there was a little ramp that went up, which is sort of curious. It's very dark. Walked all the way through the building. There was a hole in the wall back here where you could get into the stairwell that went up to the second floor. And then I walked towards the front again. Everything's boarded up. It's very dark. I had a flashlight. But I noticed as I was walking towards the front that the doors kept getting shorter and shorter. Well, it turns out that I was walking on frozen pigeon guano that got to almost 30 inches deep. And it was not piles, it was a layer. And it was geologic time, was represented with the layers of pigeon guano and dead pigeons. It was disgusting. So the second time I tried to go into the building, I made it to the back. It was now a little bit later and it's starting to warm up. The third time I opened the front door and that was it. So we had to design the whole building from the outside. We did have to do an abatement of the pigeon guano and all the interior finishing. I mean, everything had to come out because it was obviously very contaminated. When we eventually got to the roof up here, there was about half of the roof was covered with any sort of roof membrane. The rest of it was just boards. And what was there was a coal tar pitch, which is a type of roof we haven't done for a long, long time. And it was basically like parchment. So I asked a roofer friend of mine at one point in time how long it would take that type of roof to weather to that state, and he said about 60 to 80 years. So what that meant, of course, was that this roof had been leaking for a very long time. And so the guys were sitting down at this bar when it was raining, and the stuff that was dripping into their beer mugs was being filtered through all this pigeon guano. It was a pretty horrible place. In any case, this is when we did not put housing in. I had a partner who wanted to put his office in it. It's a pretty small building. And the first floor has a Subway sandwich shop on it, which I just love because it's so great to go in there now, and it smells good, first of all, and it's so fun to go in that building when you know a little bit about the history and actually eat there. So this is, and trust me, these are not the worst photos. This is already after it started to be cleaned up. But these are the offices on the second floor, and this is what the Subway looks like on the first floor. This project, again, we did secure historic preservation tax credits. This one was really difficult, but learned lots of lessons along the way, and it was enormously helpful in making this project actually happen. If we hadn't had tax credits, it would have never worked. But with the tax credits, it did. The Oliver Building, which is actually just a block away, is a 4-story warehouse building from about 1910. This is right on the tracks, and so this was built during the railroad warehouse era, where everybody wanted to be on a line. So rather than the suburban sprawl that we have today, of course, during the railroad period, everybody wanted to be right along that line to have access to the transportation. And what's interesting about this building, among other things, is that it was a farm implement dealership. And so they brought farm implements in on the track, which is on this side. They came through that door and onto an elevator, this huge elevator, but I mean, it's huge, but it's 15 feet square. And then stuff was taken up and down to the warehouse floors. And you think about 15 feet square, that isn't big enough for a tractor tire today. But they were bringing farm machinery into this building, assembling things, and then the first floor was the sales floor. Anyway, this building, because it was a warehouse building, the upstairs actually had never had any sort of mechanical systems. It was unheated, and it was really in pretty good condition. So again, when we looked at this property, we looked at, what can we put in it? Well, my first thought is always, let's put housing in it. So we took the top 2 floors and we made 2-story loft apartments. We have office on the second floor, and then we've got a combination of office and fitness center in the first floor and in the basement. And we had big hopes that we could have a restaurant in here. It would have been a really cool restaurant location, but as Jim was pointing out, you can't just wait around, or Philip, I guess. We had to get a tenant in there, and we ended up with an office on the corner. We would rather have had a restaurant, but nevertheless, building's full. This was a little over $2 million, so it was, $500,000 in tax credits. Again, just a huge benefit to this project. One of the things, again, with many older buildings and many towns around Montana, when they're made out of brick or stone, our climate, in fact, is really pretty benign on a masonry building. If the roof hasn't leaked tremendously, then it's often in incredibly good condition. So I spent a big chunk of my career in the Midwest, and when we did preservation projects in that part of the country where it rains all the time, and particularly where you get freeze-thaw, I mean, the masonry issues were significant, and we just don't have those here. So out of this $525,000 in tax credits, almost all of that drops right to the bottom line. I mean, there's very little premium cost associated with doing this kind of renovation to the standards that are required to secure approval with the National Park Service. And then on the inside, again, we just had these big open warehouse spaces. One interesting features about the building is that the floor-to-floor heights varied on each floor. The second floor was the lowest floor. It was only about 9.5 feet high, and then the upper two floors were 12 and 13.5 feet high, and I think the first floor is about 11. Now, I don't know why that is. One of the things that was kind of curious about that is that the original stairway in the building was adjacent to the elevator shaft, and the run, they used the same run length for each, and it was just a single run from floor to floor in each case. So the stair went from that to this, so some of the stairs were very steep. Another interesting little anecdote about this building is that the stairway that was in there had these great old tin-clad fire-rated doors. And we wanted to reuse the doors. In fact, there was still a UL stamp on them. And they had these huge steel frames, so we pulled the doors and the frames. We went to the building department, we said, we want to reuse these as rated doors, and they said, well, we can't do that. Why can't you do that? Well, because we don't know what this label means. I said, okay. We cut a hold of UL, they did a little research and said that this nomenclature from 1930 actually was when those were installed, is the equivalent of a 90-minute door today. So we took that back to the building department, and then they said, well, we don't know if we can use these doors because they might be damaged. And we said, well, why don't you come look at them? They're not damaged. Well, we can't do that. So we had to hire a testing agency. Unfortunately, there is one in Great Falls. For $2,500, he flew down to Billings. He looked at the door and said, well, these are great. And he nailed his little label on it that it was a 90-minute door. So then problem solved. And we got to reuse the doors as apartment entry doors. So anyway, there are ways around some of these problems. Sometimes it takes some money, sometimes it just takes a lot of conversation, but the doors were really worth saving. I mean, they're unique doors. They've got really incredible hardware on them. I mean, you can't buy something like that. So we took that extra effort and got the guy down there and got the problem solved. Now, this building is our office building. It's not quite as fancy as Jim's office building, but this one started out life as a saloon. It was built by a man named Nicholas Kloss, the inventor of Christmas. Built in about 1893, and it didn't look like this in 1893. It looked more like this, actually, but in 1893 it was a brick building, but it's also a saloon. So it was a very humble building, anyway, over time, it continued to be a bar. Lights came along, so the facade gets all bricked in, because now you don't want to be able to see inside. We bought the building and decided we wanted to try to make it into both a high-performance building as well as take advantage of tax credits. We didn't get the full tax credit. We got the 10% tax credit for reasons that I don't have time to talk about. But again, we do have we got a significant tax credit, but we also made this building into a LEED Platinum building. And one of the things I was going to say about one of Jim's comments is that we have found that we actually can spend significantly fewer dollars up front to do a project like this than if we had torn it down and built new. Here's where we started. We didn't even have a floor. This is what it looks like now. On the energy side, this was what the code would have said this building would be energy costs on an annual basis, and here's where we are. And we're going down, actually, because as we learn how to use the building, we're doing better and better. Final building, the Swift building was built in 1916 as a refrigerated warehouse. We converted it into 9 loft apartments. Again, about $1.6 million construction cost and a $412,000 tax credit. We had significant front-end cost savings compared to demolition and new construction. This building is one of only a handful in the country that is both historic certified tax credit and a LEED Platinum certified building. So again, the green thing is easy, not easy. It can happen. And it can happen with significant benefit to the owners and the occupants. Significantly less energy used than compared to new construction. Also, significantly less water. I forgot to mention our office actually uses 100% less processed water, city water, than frankly anything. It's because we have a rainwater system. All the water we use in the building comes off the roof. This building is 38% less because it's 9 apartments. We just didn't have a big enough roof in this case. But so anyway, there's lots of ways we're figuring out how to take advantage of the natural resources what we have available to us to make these buildings both productive members of the community, great places to live, and viable projects. So I guess I'm out of time. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I'm Chere Justo. It's great to go last because I get to listen to everybody else and then write down a whole bunch of ideas, extra things I want to say. I'm the executive director of the Montana Preservation Alliance. I'm filling in for Kate Hampton because I'm her boss. I made her stay home, and Jim is my boss. He's our board president, and it's always really a pleasure to be with Jim and also Randy and Philip together to talk about these things. I learn a lot every time I hear them talk about the real work that goes on to revitalize and to restore historic buildings. My days are spent convincing people to do these things. These gentlemen actually do it, and they know what they're talking about when they talk about the challenges, but also the successes that you can have financially and aesthetically and historically for revitalizing historic buildings. One of the things I wanted to talk about is just the fact that these buildings are all important not only for themselves and for the history that they represent and the potential that they hold for housing new activities, new commerce, new income-producing things, but they also are a catalyst. When you rehab a historic building, then what you do is stimulate investment, not only in that building, but in the surrounding properties and in the communities themselves. And in the years that I've been working with the Montana Preservation Alliance, it's my observation that when you have a historic building that's abandoned or threatened or deteriorated to the point where it really needs to be rescued, a lot of times that's not just a symptom that that property has gone downhill. It's a symptom that the community itself is really in trouble. And so when you have one or two or several historic buildings that are needing to be restored, then you also have the symptoms of a community that really needs to be revitalized. And one of the very best formulas for doing that, of course, is the Main Street program. And everybody raise their hands who is from rural communities here today. And I'm also wondering how many people are here from Main Street communities? And then how many are rural and Main Street? Yeah, it's interesting. The Main Street program really has so much potential for small towns. And in a lot of ways, because it presents a formula and kind of a blueprint for the direction of where you can go with a set of really good guidance principles and people with the technical expertise to come and help you to see your projects through and begin to turn things around in your downtowns. Years ago, I worked at the Montana Historical Society in the museum, and we worked on installations of historic, new historic exhibits, and a big one about the history of Montana for the centennial of the state. And I learned something in this process because there was a lot of talk and a lot of designs and plans and all of these things that were generated within a committee that worked on this project for close to 3 years. And so different community members or committee members would, have input, and then they go away and the plans would change and they come back. And so, really explicit process with a lot of drawing and a lot of visual representation of how this was going to turn out in the end. And so we created the first exhibit module, and the whole thing was built and constructed, and everybody from the exhibit team came and stood and looked at the thing, and we were all going, wow, this is great. And one guy turned to me and said, I didn't know it was going to look like that. And I'm telling you this story because it's important to remember that when you look at the potential of a historic building, or you look at the potential of your downtown, some people can really see what it's going to look like. They can imagine that. And other people really need to be shown, because they can't imagine it. And it's not because they're not paying attention. They just think about it differently. And so I think it's important to have examples like the ones we just looked at, that Randy and Jim have produced, and the examples of things I'm going to show, but also to get people out there to really look at historic renovations and downtowns that have been revitalized. Take your people there and tour them around, because I guarantee you that in your group, you'll have a lot of people that are well-intended, and some people are going to see in their minds what it could be, and other people have to be shown. They need help with the vision thing. And so, with that in mind, I'd like to show you some examples from smaller communities of buildings that have been renovated and revitalized and are beginning to catalyze impacts in their own communities, downtowns. And actually, one or two of these aren't just small towns, I should say. So, the first one is the Calvert Hotel in Lewistown. This one is just being completed. It is a historic building that used to be the dormitory for the kids who come in from the ranches, and they'd have to stay in town in the wintertime because they couldn't travel back and forth to go to school. And so this was the dorm for the kids that, were like from, I believe it was 6th grade through high school. And they had housing upstairs for the kids, dorm rooms, and on the downstairs level, oh, I get to use this thing. These are really fun if you have a cat, by the way. And this downstairs level, this is where they had the cafeteria and stuff. And so the building had a lot of space, and it was set up in a way where it already had kind of a central entryway here that accessed into a lobby room of a sort. Upstairs was already divided with bathrooms and things like that, lots of good spatial division. And in time, after it was no longer used for dormitory, it became a hotel. And this was a long-term stay hotel primarily, and this is these two lower pictures of what it used to look like during the hotel era. So the building was acquired by a guy from, actually a partnership, but the leading force behind this is a guy named Steve Duffy from Stevensville, and he's a tile installer and really kind of a master craftsman. And so he renovated the building for a high-end hotel. I just stayed there, as a matter of fact, the last couple nights because I was doing a project up that direction. And we gave them Historic Preservation Award last year, and I hadn't seen it. And it blew me away to go inside of this building. All of the tile that you're seeing, I mean, he installed tile everywhere. And in addition, he's, marble and the tile, and then in the downstairs, I'm not sure if there's a picture of this or not, but yeah, there isn't. Oops, that's bad. What do I do now? Okay, there. They did all kinds of really wonderful treatments, and they installed fireplaces, and there's copper ceiling panels in the downstairs now. And so the quality of the workmanship and the materials is just outstanding. And this is in a part of the town that's just on the hill as you would begin to drop into the downtown. It's not on the main street, but it's a couple blocks over. And so from there you can walk to everything in Lewistown. And it is part of a whole downtown that's really I wouldn't say thriving in Lewistown right now because they're struggling a little bit like many smaller towns are, but they have a lot of events and they have a lot of continuity and they're working really hard. I think Dwayne was here earlier. I'm not sure if he's still in this room, but their historic preservation officer, Dwayne Ferdinand, has really had some great success in helping to see some buildings rehabbed into innovative kinds of space and use. And they are trying with the Calvert Hotel to tie in to a lot of different events, the Chere Festival, downtown art festivals. The Charlie Russell Choo Choo starts in Lewistown and it runs out to the Geraldine area and it goes past this little church, which we just restored and are working with new Friends group to bring this online. But you know, this whole idea of connectivity between these buildings and possible other commercial activities is something that can happen. The next property is a building called the East Side Brick. And for a long time, some of you may know that this building was the annex for the county of Flathead, and they had a lot of county offices in there. It's, again, not right on the main street of town, but a block or two off. And this was an old hospital. And when we got involved, it became one of our endangered projects because there was an owner who had acquired the property, and what he wanted to do, his highest and best use in his mind in evaluating this building, was to tear it down and make a parking lot. So there was a period of about 3 years where the fate of this building was really undetermined, and in the end, some investors came in and convinced this gentleman to sell it. Before he sold it, he stripped out a lot of the wonderful interior finishes, the woodwork and stained glass windows in the chapel, because it was an old Catholic hospital, so it had some beautiful installations like that. But then he did sell it, and fortunately he did, because now the building's been rescued and the original drawings were found. Fred Brinkman, a very prominent historic architect, had designed the building originally. It was called originally the Sisters of Mercy Hospital. And this is the building after the fact. They had a concept of a mixed use, commercial and residential. Their loft apartments in there, and also one of the ideas they were latching onto was a movement that's really common in other parts of the country, which has to do with art space and art community installed in buildings. And so there's space on the main floor. It also can be used for studio work. These are just some before pictures. This is the gentleman who did the project, Eric Berry. This is before, of course. This is after. And, the building is just really a great success. And again, tying in with the kinds of things that happen in Kalispell, it's helping to revitalize the town. The Sweet Palace, this is one of my very favorite success stories. The Sweet Palace, if you all know Shirley and Dale, who live in Phillipsburg and have been really kind of the movers and shakers behind the revitalization of Phillipsburg, it all started with a vision to bring a candy store to Phillipsburg, take advantage of all these old beautiful buildings in the historic mining town that were pretty much abandoned, kind of boarded up, hadn't been used, and were really in decline for a long time. And there was a banker in Anaconda who helped to finance this project, for the first project to do the Sweet Palace. And then since that time, the whole town now hangs its shingle on the idea of preservation and historic character of the community. And if you get off the highway at Drummond, you drive that Pillar Loop, Phillipsburg is the main attraction on that route. This is a photograph from the old mining era. It's a Miners' Day parade, I think. And then these are the buildings on the right that were used during that time. The quality of construction is so wonderful. The beauty of the architecture is really undeniable. And they've made the most of it by really just enhancing what they had, all the attributes of these buildings. And then, of course, a candy store always helps. These are some of the buildings that have been done over, in addition to the candy shop. So that's what I'm talking about. Do one, and you stimulate a lot of other interest. And the work that Jim and Randy have done over the years really demonstrates that so successfully. The Higgins building that Jim was showing, the old bank on Higgins, and then the work that Randy's done south of the railroad tracks, the LL&L building in Billings and others, are in an area that many city fathers just wrote off and actually want to demolish the entire thing. The L&L, when that was turned around, really started something. And now nobody would question the importance and the value of having done the renovation on those buildings, but 15 years ago, that story was different. So there's Phillipsburg. Welcome to Phillipsburg. Car show, all kinds of things that happen there now. And then finally, I just thought it would be really interesting to look at the Billings Depot, which again was such an anchor building in this part of Billings downtown where for a long time it was scary to go down there, even in the middle of the day. And so it chased a lot of people out. It forced businesses elsewhere. Lots of the attention was turned toward the mall and other areas outside of downtown. And I worked on a downtown study of the Minnesota corridor about 15 years ago, and we looked at all these little buildings that were in use at that time. And but the Billings Depot had been restored. This had sat vacant for a long time. Jim's firm A&E worked on this, and took what was a very beautiful set of railroad buildings and still stood, and the city got engaged and the Billings Historical Society got engaged, and they worked really hard to come up with a new concept to keep the building, got a lot of grant money, worked for a number of years on the project, and now in 1995 this is how it looked on the outside and the inside. And the renovation of this one particular building sparked a whole revitalization of the entire downtown, starting on Montana Avenue, now branching over to Minnesota Avenue, and then all the radiating streets in downtown Billings. And the downtown Billings story is so inspiring because they have really brought it back in a way that the town and the city is extremely proud of, and it's very impressive, and it attracts a lot of business. And so, in the end, this kind of anchor property that can be restored and put back into use, it houses all kinds of wonderful activities. There's a restaurant, but the community can use it for workshops and things, starts all kinds of other things happening. So when you're talking about different programs and the vitality of downtown communities, these kinds of projects are really essential. So that's all of my slides, and I know we wanted to have some good time for questions. We wanted to talk, but about other things that you may want to bring up. One of the things I just did want to mention, though, is that the tax credits have been talked about repeatedly. Other kinds of funding programs are really essential to helping these projects get off the ground or to making them pencil out, and partly because in Montana, especially in smaller towns, your square footage may not be as valuable just because the rents are lower, the town population is smaller. And so in order to make these kinds of projects work, you have to get some extra money, whether it be tax credits or rural development grants or housing and urban development monies. And Larry's sitting here, and right afterwards you can talk to Mr. Gallagher, and he'll tell you that where you can get money for your projects. I'm sure. But there's also the stimulus grants that we got from the legislature that went through the Department of Commerce this year. It was really important to be able to get $4 million to then support the renovation and the sustainability of important landmark historic buildings and communities all across the state, because when you can make that investment and make it feasible from a financial end, then you begin to reap the community benefits that will ultimately revitalize your towns. And so I think, Philip, maybe you'd like to moderate for questions? Thanks very much.
So with that, we do have a few minutes for some questions, if you have questions for the presenters.
Philip and anybody else on the panel, I was curious about green building materials. How difficult is it to find that kind of material to do the projects that we saw in the presentation?
Well, we don't think that's difficult at all. And frankly, part of what we like about the LEED process is that it's a process, and there's certain sort of requirements that you get into to secure points. And when you're talking about platinum level, you can't give a lot of points away. So among those points relative to materials are renewable, recyclable, accessible, meaning within 500 miles. And so you start to change your whole way of thinking about things. And you look for what kinds of things are produced within 500 miles of your location. And we think, well, nothing, or maybe wood products. But it turns out there's way more than that when you start looking around. But the other thing, frankly, that we've found is that when we're working with these old buildings, is that there's constantly opportunities to take doors from here and use them over here, or the windows that are either damaged or single pane, we can't use them anymore. And we take those and fix them up and use them for interior relights. I mean, there's all kinds of recycling opportunities. And then of course lumber products, obviously we can easily find in Montana. And what I forgot to say though, in terms of one of those issues, is those bridge timbers that we found in the SOPO building, we ended up using to support the new floor in the Kloss building, in our office building. So we use the bridge timbers for beams, and then the posts down in the crawl space are all recycled fence posts from Cobb Fieldman that was torn down. So, you start looking around. A lot of it, frankly, is just a different attitude. It's a different way of looking at things, and all of a sudden things open up. Jim mentioned about how much of landfill space is occupied by demolition waste. Again, one of the lead issues is to reduce demolition waste. We've had reductions of up to 92%, meaning diverted from the landfill. So that's where we figured out to salvage it and reuse it, recycle it, compost it, do something with it. And again, we've been able to do that locally, which we kind of didn't realize all this stuff. We've already got the resources. But it does require a different way of thinking about things.
And here in Missoula, we actually have a number of businesses that are deconstructing and recycling materials all the time. And we have a nonprofit called Home Resource where you can take material and get material that does that. There's another outfit called Heritage Timber that takes apart, they're wizards at it. And you see their truck going by every day with new recycled big timbers and all kinds of other building materials that are going directly to be milled and used again back into buildings. I mean, that's everybody's goal. So it's happening on this local level. Any other questions?
I wanted to make one other point, if I can, then, about somebody else is thinking of a question. But when I was talking about costs, one of the points I wanted to make about cost is that in terms of what does it cost to actually do a tax credit project. And a small building, and particularly if it's already in a historic district, might cost us, the fees that it would be involved for us to actually go through the process might be in the neighborhood of $10,000. That means if you've got $40,000 in qualifying costs, of which our fees count towards that, then you've paid for us. So then anything beyond that, if you do a $60,000 project, $10,000 pays us, the other $5,000 in tax credits goes into your pocket. Now those costs will increase, but not in a linear way at all. But my point is that you can do a tax credit project with very small projects and have it work. It's not for big, just for big projects. I mean, I showed you some, things that are in the 300,000 range, but you can be much smaller than that, which is, again, in terms of sometimes small communities, you might only be doing a $100,000 project. Well, you can make tax credits work for a project like that.
Yeah, my project, the office building where we are, that was about a $250,000 remodel of that building, and so I got very small tax credit. I didn't need the credits very much, so I spread it out over probably about 10 years, that small, whatever it was, 18,000, whatever it was. But it works for very small projects also. Yeah. And
Just if you could address this morning's discussion earlier, one of the questions asked, or I guess it was a statement, was that the imposition of the easement to keep it historic and not alter it for, I understood it was 50 years, was a major impediment to borrowing money and finding financing. Have you found that on any of your projects?
Not sure where 50 years comes from. If you do a tax credit project, first of all, the building does have to be listed on the National Register, and you do have to maintain that building for 5 years without making any changes to it that would impact what was approved as part of that tax credit. But after 5 years, if you want to tear it down and put your parking lot in, have at it.
Thank you for clarifying.
And we, of course, the hope is that you've invested a lot of money in it, that you would not do something as stupid as that. But, and that's that comment, I've heard that comment just yesterday in another context, and I don't know where that's coming from, but it's not true.
Well, there's a difference between easements and the
Tax
tax credit
Okay,
program.
well, all right, that's
So maybe
a good
people are
point, too.
confusing it.
If somebody has put a preservation easement on a property, that's a different thing altogether. That's where they've said, the building looks like this, and I'm going to sell it to you on the basis that it never change, or you don't change it for 50 years. But in terms of the tax credit process, or just being listed on the register, you can be delisted if you change something, but otherwise there's really no negative implications.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that because all of the buildings in downtown Helen have received federal grants, some of them up to $150,000 for facade, have perpetual easements on them. That was not a major problem in obtaining financing. So it's a non-issue, I believe. I just wanted to see if it's changed since I was involved in it.
Yeah, and again, I think the difference is the easement issue. But really, once you've spent the money to fix the building up, why would you want to wreck it anyhow?
Let's entertain one more question, and then respect everybody's time, we'll.
Just a comment, I think what Larry's talking about is SAT grant money. That's-
Save America's Treasures.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you all for coming in, thank you to the panel.